Thank you so much for joining us, Olivier. It's such a pleasure to have you today. Really appreciate your time. Thank you. Olivier, you are the co-founder and CEO of Datadog, a company that you grew from 0 to 50 plus billion of market cap today. So Datadog is a solution for engineering and product teams and helps them make sense of the most complex system on the planet. It's been a tremendous success, and I'm really happy that you're here today with us to share your journey. So let's start maybe with a question on observability and AI. As AI becomes embedded in every layer of technology, from infrastructure to decision-making, observability in that word takes a new meaning. So I'd love to start there and ask you, how do you define observability today? Why does it matter more than ever in the age of AI? And what does that become when AI moves into mission-critical workflows, and how should organizations be thinking about that in the future ahead?
Yes, so thanks for having me here. And I apologize for forcing you to say observability so many times in 1 hour. It's the worst word to pronounce in a fast pace like that. So what we define observability is it's basically the idea of understanding how your applications are working, how they're working internally, how they're working from a technical perspective, how they're working for the engineers that built them, but also how they're working for the business and the customers that end up using them. So the idea is to understand everything from the very low level, the CPU and the networks and things like that, all the way up to how much revenue our applications are generating and what they're doing for the business, and bringing all that together. So that's what we think of as observability. It's been around for a while. So ever since the first computer was sold, or the first computer software was sold, there was software that was sold with it to manage it. At the time, it was called monitoring, not observability, but it was the same idea. I think it's becoming more and more relevant because there's been an explosion of complexity for applications in general. So it used to be that the engineers would spend years shipping small pieces of software that would run on one computer. Today, with all of the gains of productivity, in a few minutes, you can build something that's going to be shipped to customers immediately and run on thousands of machines, and include like hundreds of services. And AI is just accelerating that. There's just way more that can be built way faster. And also the applications we're building with AI are not as deterministic as the applications we used to have before. It used to be that everything an application did, you'd spend weeks and months understanding them, building them, speccing them. Today with AI, you can either build an application on top of an AI model, which is stochastic in nature, it's not deterministic, or even if you write code, it's very possible that a lot of the code you won't write yourself, like the AI will write most of it, and you actually don't understand really what's happening there. So if you zoom out a little bit and if you look at the broader picture, what's happening is that we're spending a lot less time building and a lot more time running applications. And so a lot of the understanding of whether these applications are doing the right thing, they're working right, they're doing what's expected for the business, or if they're secure and performing as expected, all of that you have to understand in production environments using observability, as opposed to doing that at the design phase when you're first building your software.
Thank you so much for sharing that context. And I know that one of the things you've said is that it would be so much better, I'm going to quote you here, it would be so much better if systems fix themselves and didn't wake you up at night. If you think about the future ahead, how close do you think we are to that vision?
So we're not there yet. And I'll give you a little bit of a background, like if you zoom out, the work of fixing an application when it goes down at night, because usually it's at night, I don't know why, but you have to wake up people and you have to get them to fix an application. The work they're doing is actually pretty complicated because applications are all fairly different. So if you compare, say, auto-fixing an application with self-driving. Self-driving looks like it's around the corner. It's been around the corner for a while, but it looks like it's really around the corner now. It's really happening, it's arriving. Anybody can drive a car. Like anybody over the age of 16 can drive a car. And it's something that most humans do pretty well. Versus solving a problem in an application usually involves a team of really skilled engineers. Maybe you have a few PhDs in the mix, and people work really hard to understand, formulate hypotheses, understand what might work and not work, and how to solve the issue. So it's an inherently more complicated problem. As I said earlier, also there's an explosion of complexity, and the problem is that we're not standing still. So everyday applications are becoming more complex. So as companies such as, for example, build tooling to auto-remediate and auto-understand issues, the application themselves keep getting more complicated. So far, we've been playing a catch-up game with that. Now, that being said, there's been a real step change in the capability of AI. I think what used to be science fiction a few years ago, which is, for example, using all of the documentation that's been written about a product, understanding all of the product interactions from end users. All of that is possible now, and actually is fairly accessible with the recent AI models. So we're seeing that we can start catching up and starting to live up to that dream of not having to wake up people and have them work for hours to understand why an application is broken and to have them fix it. So we shipped a product. We have an AI, we call it an SRE agent for system reliability engineer. So what it does basically is it investigates alerts on its own and it understands what went wrong and then gives a pointer to fix it. And we started shipping that. It's actually in production and it's being used by customers. And we see that in a large number of cases, by the time customers actually wake up and they go into their systems, there is already a hypothesis of what's wrong. And instead of a Zoom call with 20 people and working for 3 hours in the middle of the night, maybe in 15 minutes, they have a good idea of what's wrong and they can just wake up the 2 people who need to fix it. So we're still not in the world where everything is fixed in the morning and people don't have to wake up, but I think we're getting there.
That's really awesome to hear how you think about that. So I think we started to touch a little bit on that, but you've spoken about the evolving role of human and AI interaction. So what can be automated, what cannot be, etc. And so how do you think about decisions? What should remain human-centered versus fully automated? And are there specific decisions at your company that you would never hand over to AI? And if so, why?
Yeah, so I think we're still a little bit early to think about like very broad decision making that is being made by AI. The way we think about it is we're focusing on 2 things. One is freeing more time for the deeper thinking, the more strategic thinking, the big decisions. And we do that by trying to not spend as much time in reaction mode. So reaction mode would be what I talked about earlier with waking up and fixing issues. Also happens throughout the day. If you ask engineers what they spend their day on, they'll tell you there's so much of their time they spend firefighting with various things that are breaking or not working as expected or last minute changes or things like that. So if we can get rid of that and have the AI do a lot of that, we free a lot more time to think, to build, to understand what matters and to plan what's going to come next. Another area we focus on for that is on the security side. We also built an agent for analyzing security signals and telling customers whether these signals are benign or need attention. And it's the same idea. Like, instead of spending 80% of your day on reacting and chasing so many benign issues, if you can just focus on the few that are meaningful, then you can spend the rest of your time thinking hard about what in the broader sense needs to change about your security posture, what you can do to be better in the future. And so we want to free time for that. So that's one area we focus on, saving time. The second area we focus on is getting better data. And I think the AI in general, and maybe we can come back to that, but AI in general is only as good as the data that feeds it. And so for that, if we can get better data, faster data, cleaner data, we can make better decisions. And so we focus on that as a company, like the way we look at all of our various teams and business areas, like whether that's front office, back office, finance, go-to-market, or engineering. We focus a lot on getting the right data and getting it as fast as possible so we can make the right decisions. As a product builder, we also invest in helping our customers understand how their data is flowing, capturing the best data. For us, we capture it at the source, which is the application that actually runs the business. So if you have an e-commerce application that runs your business, that's the best place to get your data and to get it flowing and to get it right. But then we also realize that data typically follows a lot of different steps until it is being fed either in business dashboards or in AI models. And so we also realize that we need to build a whole stack for data quality and data observability. And we even acquired a company that built data observability to merge that into our products.
Wow, that's amazing. And if you think now about things you would never trust AI on when it comes to taking decisions, there's some areas where you think humans still should be at the center of everything here?
Oh, look, all the bigger decisions, they're not going to be made by AI for quite some time, I think. Resource allocation, things like that, where we spend our time, which products, areas we go into. But I think we're automating a lot of smaller real-time decisions with AI. And I would say what you can automate, I think it depends on the domain, and it depends also on the customers and their culture. So I can give you a few examples. With an AI SRE, you can automate restarting systems, messing with services that might be running or not running, updating code, rolling back code, and things like that. With a security agent, you can also automate shutting down systems that might be affected by an issue. And there's a number of other things you can do, like blocking users. We found that, at least today, our customers tend to be more confident with automating action based on security signals than on operational signals. And the reason for that is the upside, the downside is calculated differently. For a security issue, the downside, if you overreact, is that you're going to cause some availability issue. But the downside, if you underreact, is that you might have a security incident, which is a much bigger, long-lasting issue. And so customers are fine being a little bit over-automated and taking action very quickly. On the operational side, I think the calculus is a little bit different. So users prefer to be in the loop today. I think this is going to change over time, but you can see that in different parts of the business, there's a different tolerance for automation or desire for automation.
Yeah, we see that too at Pigment with the different teams we're serving. So I think that leads us nicely into thinking about trust. And I think trust is ultimately at the heart of the adoption topic. And you often say that false positive will kill adoption. So I was wondering, how do you think about calibrating the right level of trust in AI systems, especially where, obviously for business critical decisions that we are talking about, where the stakes are really high?
Yes. And so it's a very good point. So that's one lesson we've learned very early on with Datadog. It's that customers, when we talk to customers and everything we do starts with customer conversations, there's one lie we hear from customers, which is, hey, I prefer the false positive because I will decide if I need to pay attention. I want to be aware of it. And then if it matters, I will take action. The reality of it, and we know because we've tested it, is that if you send 3 false positives in a row to a customer, they'll just turn you off. Nobody wants to be on the receiving end of that. And so we need to do the work of understanding what needs to be shown to customers, and we need to have a high bar to it for it. When you think about AI automation, the bar is even higher. Like it's higher for AI than it is for humans. I think it's, when you think of all the situations where we see our teams or our customers go through outages and try to understand what's going right or wrong, it's very frequent for humans to be wrong. Like humans will have hypotheses and they'll communicate that to their coworkers, and in the end, it won't date. And it's okay for humans to be only right 60, 70% of the time. It's actually a great hit rate. But if an AI is only right 60 or 70% of the time, it's not going to work. We have higher expectations from AI. We have a lower tolerance for being sent in the wrong direction by a machine than by a human coworker. And so we need the standard to be a lot higher. And so the whole process we have around building AI agents is to have first the right evaluations for those internally so that we can know when they're good enough to be shipped to customers. Usually it means with a success rate in the way north of 90%. And then that depends a little bit on the use cases. I think there can be different quality criteria depending on the use cases.
Yeah, so the 80% is quite a high bar. If you think actually about that and about the fact that AI will go even further away than where it is today and will really be acting on your behalf to make decisions on your behalf and probably take not only decisions, but also actions on your behalf. Can you explain the foundations or the guardrails that you think businesses will need to have in place to take advantage of that shift?
Yeah, so it really depends. Again, it depends on the culture of the business. It depends on the use case. Like when we measure the models, so I give you two examples. Again, I talked earlier about the AI SRA and I talked about the AI security agent. The quality for both is measured very differently. For a security agent, you need the agent to be very stable and reliable in that if you ask the agent about the same issue twice, you should get the same answer, which with generative AI is not a given. A lot of things can change when you re-roll the stochastic process a few different times. And look, everybody understands there might be an error margin, like same thing with humans, there's an error margin. But you want the outcome to be the same every time, or you completely lose the trust of the user. On the other hand, if you compare that to the SRE agent, so the agent that looks at outages and solves outages, it's actually okay if you get a slightly different result every time you run it. And the reason for that is you're never going to run it twice on exactly the same data set. Like it doesn't make any sense. The situation is changing over time. However, what's really important for it is for the solution to be, or the model to run very fast, because it's very relevant if it runs in a few minutes. If it runs in half an hour, it's not relevant at all. And so we place the quality evaluation in different places. And then, of course, then around that, like there's different guardrails you can put in place to guarantee that the models are not going to do certain things. Those we find tend to be very specific to the customer, their culture, and how fast they want to move and what is particularly important for their business.
No, thank you so much. This is really, I think, a great insights for everybody to think about that context. I was also wondering if you think about like how business are going to buy AI and AI solutions out there. There's a lot of hype today in the market, and there is also true business value being created by companies like Datadog. What are the advice you would give again to business buyers about how to really differentiate between the hype, the business values, what indicators they should look at to understand what platform, what tools, etc., are going to bring value? So yeah, it would be interesting to hear from you on that.
Yeah, I think what's tricky about the age of AI is that everything looks good in a demo. And I would say in most cases, the reality is not as advanced as a demo, or rather the demo is the absolute best case, and what you actually get when you try the products might vary quite a bit. I'd say there's two pieces of advice I would give. The first one is to decide as a business what's completely core to you, and where you're going to be a leader, an early adopter, and where you're just going to be a fast follower and a educated buyer, because you can't actually innovate and be at the forefront everywhere at the same time. So for us, the decision was fairly obvious. Like we build for engineering teams and product teams and security teams. And so we had to build product for that. So we have to be at the forefront for that very specific part. For the parts that we don't build ourselves, we also have to be at the forefront. Like we have to work with the best companies to understand how our customers work. For the rest, the back office, everything that has to do with finance, go-to-market, we don't have to be at the forefront. We don't have to invent that technology. We don't have to be the very first to try the product. It's okay if we give ourselves a little bit more time and we see what's working best and not. So that's one piece of advice. The other piece of advice is when you think of how you're going to adopt the technology internally, like one big question is, do you centralize the innovation? Do you decentralize? Do you do top-down? Do you do bottom-up? And my advice is to do both. I think it's good to have a few big initiatives that are driven top-down, and you want to make sure they reach everywhere in the org. And not every part of the org is easy to move when it comes to changing the way they work and technology they adopt. But at the same time, it's important to give room for all of the various teams and pockets in the organization that have creativity or that have understand a specific issue and that want to solve it. It's important to give them room to build and innovate. And so it's good to have this ability for various teams to adopt in a bottom-up way. And I think some of that is going to work, some of that is not going to work. In the end, as the market matures, I think everybody's going to end up in a better place 1 year, 2 years, 3 years from now.
And so to elaborate on that, what do you keep top down? What do you do more bottom up? And maybe also as a follow-up question, how do you think about this culture of experimentation? What are the processes you've put in place, especially at your size, to make that work?
Yes. So the part that's top down is the part that you want to make sure absolutely everybody in the org does. So it might have to do with the common software you use for collaboration, for managing the business, managing the internal HR process, like things like that. Like you want to make sure that you have some common base and that it reaches everywhere in the org. It might also relate to education, like how you educate people to the new technologies they can use, make sure it comes across their radar, make sure people get the memo that they need to change the way they work. So all of that, I think, is fairly top down. Bottom up might be very much more team specific. So a team is doing customer support and they have some ideas of specific problems they can automate or specific tools they want to try. So there needs to be room for all of that. I think it's too early to understand everything that can be done top down. And also you want to be able to identify the people and the teams that have a burning need, that have the creativity and that can get going there. Now you said the problem is how do you evaluate that? And I think like we're right in the middle of it. I think the question is for each of those, like internally, the way we look at all those projects is we ask ourselves, what does it look like if it works? So what are we trying to do? Is there a way we can measure whether it works or not? Is there a metric we can peg to it of some sort? How do we know that we should keep going? Stop. And we try to set that from the get-go. Like we say in 6 months, where are we? How do we know we can keep going? How do we know we should stop? We're still early though. So right now, most of the initiatives are still going. So I can't tell you whether we're doing a good job at it or not. What I know is that there's a lot going on in many parts of the org. That's exciting. It's a little bit scary too.
Yeah, I can imagine, but I think it's probably the feeling of a lot of leaders that are listening to you right now is that it's a mix of super exciting new innovation and obviously being a little bit scared about what's next. So Wondering if there are specific changes you've already made short-term in terms of KPI, like what are the KPIs you were talking about that you are tracking now? Have you created some new roles, like cross-functional roles? Have you created some specific committees? Like, would love to know if there are a couple of concrete examples that might be applicable to pretty much any industry here.
Yeah. Look, a lot of the focus and a lot of the management bandwidth goes into the product building side of the org. Because for us, it's a huge market and a huge opportunity to serve AI. There's two big parts for us. There's AI for observability for AI. So basically helping our customers understand their AI systems. And it's a huge array of investment. And the other half of it is AI for observability, which is what I mentioned earlier, which is how do we automate everything for our customers. And it's a very large investment for us to do all that. So there's a lot of focus that goes into that. We build a whole new series of functions at Datadog for that. We built an AI research team. Like we didn't have a pure research team before. As an aside, I started my career in the US in a research team. I worked for IBM in research. And the way research worked at the time was that you would invent something, develop something, publish a paper, and it would probably be turned into a product maybe in 10, 15, 20 years, if ever. And today with AI, we see research that turns into products within 6 months, and that is not published. So for companies such as ourselves, we need to have an AI research team. So we're hiring researchers. So that's a whole new function that we created. So again, a lot is going on the product side. A lot is going on there also on the way we develop. So we build some AI agents and also some developing agents, so coding agents. But we also use a lot of the agents that have been written by others. So we use Cursor, we use Cloud Code, we use a lot of those. And our developers have quite a bit of flexibility in terms of what it is they can use. And so we've put a lot of attention also into how do we transform the way we build product, the way we write code, and how do we measure that? I would say on how do we measure that, we're also still early. We have a pretty good sense of usage, pretty good sense of adoption. We see that the pace of adoption is exploding. So to give you some sense of what we've been through, we started adopting the coding agents or the coding assistants, I should say, 2 years ago with GitHub Copilot. The adoption was slow and some people really loved it, but some people were adverse to it on the team. Then we started adopting the second generation of coding agent with Cursor and Cloud Code and the others. And then we saw explosive adoption. We saw developers couldn't adopt them fast enough. It spread to the team extremely fast, which gives us a sense that developers see value. Now, in terms of measuring the value for the business, we're not there yet. I can't tell you that we're that much better at shipping functionality that has an impact on the business. I think we're still working on that. I know it's a problem we have. I know it's a problem our customers have. And it's something that we're investing quite a bit on. If you look at the rest of the business, outside of building products, we're still working with the same existing KPIs. And the first areas we want to show value for AI are the ones where we can show those well-understood KPIs. So for example, the time it takes us to answer support requests. That's a very easy one. We have good metrics. The metrics are stable. We should be able to see the impact there fairly well.
These are great examples. And wondering, by the way, if you have parallels between how you think about adoption in general for AI products with what you saw with Cursor and Cloud Code, etc. Why do you think all of a sudden engineers see this tremendous value on adopting at very fast scale, like now, and if you compare it to what you had before, which was GitHub Copilot, like what made the huge difference and the huge leap here?
I think, and by the way, it's not a Cursor versus GitHub kind of thing. I think GitHub also has agents now. I think more comparing to the first generation and second generation of agents. I think second generation is just that much better and automates a lot more of the painful work. So it removes a lot of the friction for developers, which is something that developers love. I'm an engineer. I understand that. I can finally start coding again. So I was coding for the first 5-6 years of Datadog. Then I stopped because it took me more time to set up the development environment than I actually had to code. But with coding agents, all of that grunt work is getting out of the way again. I can just get things done very quickly. I'm not quite sure it's high quality work, but I can actually get things done. And so that's a very big change. When I look at the rest of the organization, I think we see some signs of that happening, but I think we're still in the V1 of agents for the rest of the domains and not V2. Again, if we look at what happened on the development side, I have a pretty high level of confidence that we're going to see similar adoption patterns for the rest of the business.
Do you know where? Do you have any area where you think it might come next, or it's too much to predict right now?
I think it's hard to tell. If you had told me like 3 years ago that the first area that would be quite a bit automated by AI would be programming, I would not have believed it. So I think we're not that great at understanding what these models are going to be the best at.
Yeah, I agree with you. So obviously you went from a startup founder to leading one of the largest tech companies in the world today. You've mentioned obviously how AI has changed the way you manage a company today with your AI research team, for instance. I was wondering if there are other beliefs about leadership of product building that have completely changed for you along the way of the journey.
We haven't really changed the main cultural tenets of the company or the way we build. So just to give you a bit of background, so Datadog was not an obvious winner in the early days. It was hard for us to fundraise. We had a lot of competitors on the West Coast in the US that were much better funded than we were. And so as a result, we developed a few, I would say, core tenets. Like one was humility, and we were basically scared to fail. So we tried to learn as much as possible from potential customers to make sure we build the right thing, which I think is good. We still have that today. We keep that today. The second thing we had was we never believed we could raise a ton of money. So we wanted to build a business that was very efficient so that we could be self-sustainable as quickly as possible. And we've also kept that today. So we're very, as a public company, we're a high-performing stock because we have a very profitable business in addition to having good growth. So all that we kept. We also had fairly early on, and then we kept building on that over time, the notion that we wanted very clean and fast feedback loops for our product. And for us, the main feedback loop was revenue and retention. So are customers buying the products and are they staying with us? Early on, we made a decision to have that feedback loop be as quick as possible. So we were actually not selling yearly plans. We were selling month-to-month plans, which in enterprise software is a bit crazy when you hear most software is sold for 3 years. But we thought if we sell for 3 years, we won't have the bad news early enough. And we will be able to lie to ourselves into thinking that, yeah, okay, the customer is not really using the product, but we're going to fix it, or it's going to get better, or we just need to onboard them. Whereas when you have revenue that disappears very quickly, you can't lie to yourself. You have to stare at it and you have to fix it. And that we still have today. When we ship new products, we try as much as possible to have separate SKUs, separate revenue lines for the new products so that we understand what the value is. We understand whether the product is good enough, and we can have those harsh numbers stare at us every month. Okay, so what's the retention like? What does it look like? And that gives us the discipline to keep building and keep fixing what's not working.
I absolutely love that discipline, and I know how much truth-seeking you're always thinking about these principles. So it's really, I think, amazing insights for everybody.
Just for the free plug, I actually log into Pigment every week to actually look at those numbers and see how we're doing and how we're doing with the various parts of attention.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the publicity. And thank you so much for being such a great customer as well of Pigment. We value a lot everything your team and you are doing on the platform. You were talking about the West Coast and about the difficulty at the beginning. I was curious. Obviously, we both build our companies outside Silicon Valley. Today is a big talent war on AI. And wondering here, what you've been credited a lot by being in New York and keeping Datadog grounded, as you just shared, with your values and the way you were thinking about the culture of the company. I was wondering, what do you think the ecosystem there taught you about building a different type of tech company? And what do you feel about what's happening today? I don't know if some things have changed or if you still have the same belief.
Yeah, look, initially, it was a bit of a choice and a bit of a, in a way, we also didn't have a choice. We didn't, as I said, we were not the high flyer, top funded company when we started. And so we had to be more grounded in a way. Nobody was telling us we were geniuses. And so we were not tempted to believe it. I think what seemed like a disadvantage initially, which was we're further away from where most of the hard tech was invented and where the biggest talent pool was, which was Silicon Valley, actually turned out to be a pretty big advantage because we were further away from most other tech companies, but much closer to the bulk of our potential customers. And it gave us a much better idea of what the actual problems were and what we need to solve for them. So it was in New York, we had access to all of these bigger, less tech-forward companies, and they were all very happy to talk to us about their problems. And we spent considerable amounts of time. We actually spent the first 6 months of the company talking to potential customers before we even wrote a line of code. And I think we got a lot and we learned a lot from that. And then we could choose to spend time with those customers to inform our roadmaps and to solve the right problems. If I compare it with what a lot of our competition has done at the time. So most of our competition was in the Bay Area. Most of these companies tended to work with other leading tech companies on problems that might not have been real problems in the broader market, or that ended up being faddish, ended up being things that seemed cool and seemed interesting at the moment, but were never really materialized as a problem in the larger market. So for us, it was definitely an advantage. It was also an advantage in terms of talent retention. I think if you compare the retention of, or the usual retention, I should say, for tech talent in particular, it's higher in New York than it is in the Bay Area. And I think it's even higher in Europe than it is in New York. So I think there's a whole spectrum there. So it was advantageous for us in those ways. If I compare to the situation today, I think today you see a lot of the same. There's a lot more talent concentration and more effervescence in the Bay Area than anywhere else in the world, even though the ecosystems are much more developed today in New York and in France in particular. I think we've seen it's night and day from what it was when we started Datadog. So I think there's much more effervescence. It creates the same issues, which is it's hard to tell what's real and what's not. Something that sounds cool and that's repeated by 10 startups at the same time, it must be true. So I think a lot is the same, but at the same time, you need to be close to what's being invented because as I mentioned earlier, the lead time between breakthrough research and product is a lot shorter. So you cannot wait for 2 or 3 years for a problem to percolate through the real world until it finds its way through you. You have to get ahead of that. So I think today, companies, for better or for worse, have to move a little bit faster, be a bit more tentative. So basically go after problems that are not as clear and be willing to be wrong more often than maybe they were like 5 or 10 years ago. So in our case at Datadog, we're very deliberate about it. That we understand that for everything that has to do with AI, which is a lot of our roadmap right now, we're going to be wrong more often than before. And we place the dial differently in terms of the risk taking and how many new projects, new problem solving we're willing to underwrite at any point in time.
This is, I think, great advice for everybody. And I think it's a good segue to my next question, which is around simplicity and focus, because I think we talked about talent, about culture, about your process, about how you're thinking about the world of AI today. And I know that you said that the simplicity of the product is driven by the user base you have. That was part of your 20 PVC podcast with Harry. And I was wondering, given that you serve everyone from like the smallest startup to the largest companies out there, how do you maintain simplicity where your customer needs are so diverse? And how do you think again about simplicity is this new word, given that, as you said, like everything is more blurry, more complex?
Yes. I'm a firm believer that your product is the reflection of which customers you spend time with. And when I talk to a lot of startups, I think the biggest decision startups make is who are their first customers going to be and who are they going to spend time with. Usually I try to discourage them to spend too much time with intermediaries, so integrators, because I think it adds too much friction between them and the end customer, and it's harder to understand what's the right problem to solve and what's not the right problem to solve. I also often have companies asking me, should we spend more time with our existing customers in Europe? Should we go to the US first? My advice is usually, hey, don't stay in one place. Make sure you have a representative set of customers. Make sure you don't get to overfit your product vision to a specific market. So you need to get a bit more diversity in there. One path many enterprise software companies like Datadog go through typically is you start building for leading edge companies, and because they're the first ones who are going to adopt your product, and you sell to startups initially and smaller companies. And then you realize that you can make a lot more money by selling to bigger companies, and that's the companies that pay the bill at the end of the day, and that's where your growth is going to come from. And you tend to over-focus on those larger customers, and you go what's called going up market, when you tend to spend more time with the large enterprises. And as a result, you tend to overfit your product to the needs of very sophisticated customers that have been onboarded on your product many years ago, and that just have many more new complicated needs. And what you end up with in the end is something I call, not so lovingly, the enterprise abomination, which is you have these super complicated products nobody understands. You need years of consulting to get them deployed, and simple humans cannot and do not want to use those products anymore. And so to combat that, we thought, and we were very deliberate about it, that we need to make sure we have a counterweight to it. Yes, of course, the large customers are going to have a huge amount of sway on what we do because they're going to sign big contracts with us. We're going to spend a ton of time with them to understand how they use our product and what they need. But the counterweight is going to be the large number of individual small companies and startups that are going to use our product. So for that, we have a product, we have a free product that's being used by students, that's being used by individuals. We serve many startups who work really hard to keep onboarding as many of the new startups as possible, so that we know that when we break something, like when you make something too complicated to serve large customers, we're going to hear from the large number of small customers that it's not working. So the bottom half of our customers, so we have about 30,000 customers. The bottom half of our customers represent about 1% of our revenue. And so we spend all this time, all this energy, all this effort to serve all these customers that really are immaterial to the overall revenue of the company, but that are very material to keeping the product simple enough. And that's why we want to make sure we keep that counterweight.
That's such a great philosophy. I love that. I think that's the first time I'm hearing this. So thank you for sharing. So I know you don't like prediction, because I know you are not the person that likes to tell things that are not probably true yet. But I was wondering if you think about the opportunities ahead of us, so the future, and we understood very well how you think about the present and AI and where it brings value. I'd love to know what you think are the most exciting opportunities out there for enterprise over the next 3 to 5 years, especially I would say for large companies. And obviously, conversely, what do you believe is the biggest risk that organizations are underestimating when it comes to AI?
Yeah, you started the conversation about making decisions with AI. I think maybe we'll get there. I don't know. But most important to me is making sure that most of the boring work, most of the reactive work, most of the caring and feeding for all the various systems we have around us, all of that could go away. I think that would be fantastic. And I think I believe this can happen. I clearly see it on our field in observability, in security, in what we do as a business for a living. I see it also in many of the other fields we're using. I mentioned customer support. There's many parts of our go-to-market that I think are somewhat painful and labor-intensive that we can automate. So I think there's opportunity everywhere. I think in the freeing up time from reactive work to work on building and thinking, I think there's a 10x in productivity to be had. I think also there's an order of magnitude more data and fresher data we can get so we can take faster decisions. So I think when you combine those two, we can have businesses that are not only much more efficient, much better, but also much more enjoyable to run if we can spend all this time on the actual building. So that's really something I'm excited about. And I think the impact on the broader society can be really amazing. If we can be 10 times as productive, maybe we can build all that amazing technology we've seen in science fiction. And I don't think it will build itself. I don't think the one big AI in the sky will create all of that for us. I think it will be work. And I think us humans will actually do that work. But I think we'll be able to do it because of the gains of productivity and the ability we will have to project ourselves forward as opposed to being bogged down in all of the things that are broken. So that's on the positive side. On the risk, I would say the main risk today, the main question is, I think it's still not quite clear what the form factor of AI is going to be in our businesses 5 years from now. So what do we interact with? What's the UX for it? How often do we interact with it and how much feedback do we give it? I'm not quite sure that the chatbot is the UI that will work in the end. I think humans like having set UIs when they understand what's going to happen. They press a button, something happens, or like when you go in a car, we started replacing everything with touchscreens. Now we're bringing the buttons back because we feel comfort in understanding where things are and how they work. So I think from a form factor perspective, there's still a lot that needs to be understood. I think also the question is, how do we understand the AI? How much of a visibility do we have into it? And how much feedback do we give it? I think is also wide open. As a business, I have a fairly maximalist view on what we'll end up doing. I think most of our jobs, like human jobs, will be in a way observability jobs. I think we'll be interacting with AI models. We'll want to understand what they think, how they think, why they think it, and how it interacts with or it intersects with what we are trying to do. I think we still have to invent the way it's going to work, but I think it's going to be a big part of our futures.
I love that. So I really love how you're thinking about the future being a way to innovate even more, even faster, being even more creative and even more observability. I have to say it one last time. So thank you so much for this fascinating discussion, incredible insights for the audience. That was really great. If you don't mind, I will just end with quick fire questions very fast for everybody to take something from there. I know you are not a big fan of advice for founders, but I'm just going to ask you, what's one mistake you hope other founders or C-level leaders do not repeat?
So to me, the biggest mistake, it goes back to one of the key cultural tenets we have at Datadog, but the big mistake is not to have short feedback loops. And I think many founders and people in companies, big and small, lie to themselves about what's working and what's not working. Usually you tell yourself it's working, or you tell your organization it's working while it's actually not working. And I think seeing the reality for what it is the toughest part of running and scaling a business.
Yeah, so what you said around adoption and making sure you track and you do what you did, which is like a tough choice of the 1 month contract or things that really help you, force you into that.
And you see that too as you scale your company. It's as the company grows, like people want to feel good, they want to look good, they want to be promoted, so they want good news. And so everything that happens can be messaged in a way that looks good. And I think it's really hard. It takes a lot of discipline to be honest and to understand what's not working. Culturally also, I think it's hard to build an organization where people feel like they can be promoted for delivering bad news, saying, actually, we're doing that and it's not working. And I understand why it's not working. You want people to feel, it shouldn't be career limiting to say that, basically.
I love that. I really love that advice. And second question, what's a decision you are proud not to have made?
I don't know. It's hard for me to think about things I didn't do. We've been very incremental in the way we've built products. So we think about, if you contrast with the way Apple builds products, for example, Apple, people go into the bunker, they work for 2 years in secret, and then you have a big reveal on stage and you see the product fully formed. On our end, the moment we start thinking about a product, we call up customers, we try and make sure it makes sense to them, then we work with them, then we release the first version publicly that's somewhat embarrassing, and then we keep working on it with customers until we see it click and work, and until it's good enough to be GA and scaled, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the one decision I'm very happy not to have made is to, every time we thought, hey, should we try and keep that under wraps? Should we try to spend more time on it internally before we show it? I'm very happy I decided every single time, no, let's open it up. We're going to be a little bit ashamed of it initially, or maybe we'll give a heads up to our competition that we're working on that. But you know what? That's fine. That's the price to pay to actually build good stuff, and we'll keep going with that.
I love that. And so to wrap up, one final question from me. So obviously you are at the forefront of innovation of AI. I know you talk to people all the time to really be at the forefront of what AI research is doing today and how to bring that into your products. I was wondering for the audience if you could share one advice on what they could read, listen to, look at to get better and to really understand what's at stake there for them and to really be educated around AI in general.
Look, my recommendation is there's like a ton of newsletters and things like that on AI. You pick a few of them, like I have, I think 4 or 5 that I'm subscribed to. They tend to be more on the technical side, usually, so I understand the underpinnings of what it is we're building. But you pick a few of them and you start your day with those. I think that's a great way to stay up to date, to see also what's being repeated between the different newsletters. So that gives you an idea of what actually is most important, most relevant. And it's a big time investment, I won't lie. My favorite joke on AI is when people ask me if it's saving me time, I say, no, I'm still not at break even. I still spend more time learning about it than it's saving me. But I think it's an important part of our jobs. I think it's the biggest transformation I've seen since I started in the late 90s, started working. So I think it's extremely important that we all understand what's happening and where it's going.
Thank you so much for that note. Thank you for your passion and everything you shared. That was really valuable. So really appreciate your time. Thank you. That was phenomenal. Thank you. See you soon, Olivier.
All right. Thank you very much.